This is wonderful, Tessa.
About the only thing you have to worry about then is the bulb going out on the overhead. And I've been there too, so it's some days you just can't win. Okay, we are recording. So if anyone missed the beginning half of this, I just now remembered to record. Maybe when I finish up the presentation, I'll go back to the beginning and re-say what I said, so everyone gets all the material. So at least I didn't make it all the way through. Okay. So I found this saying, and I think it helps out that this guy is actually a Danish architect. And if you didn't know, I do first Lego League Robotics. And this Danish architect designed a Lego-built full-size house. So I thought it was fitting that I liked his quote. So sustainability can't be like some sort of moral sacrifice or a political dilemma or a philanthropical cause. It has to be a design challenge. And this kind of rang true with me. I like this thinking, is that, you know, we can't do it just because, you know, morally this is what we believe in, or our politics leans one way or another, or we're trying to save the human race. It really is a design challenge. Let's pick the best design for the problem that we have and move forward. And I like that, and it doesn't surprise me at all that he builds with Legos. That's very fitting. So some of the design challenges we face, and we're going to step through some of these. So one of the designs challenges soil and microbes and structure and soil health, and we might hear things like water conservation and no-till. One of our design challenges is choosing a sustainable nitrogen source, and so we'll hear things like organic. And plant choices, maybe growing from seed is one of the design challenges we're trying to face. So we need to talk about heirloom versus hybrid versus GMO seeds. Maybe it's an economic challenge. So I'm always looking for an affordable mulch. So maybe we can look, you know, recycling or reusing things is a big buzzword out there now. And then social, one of the design challenges is designing a community garden. And kind of one of the buzzwords is eat local, grow local. We can talk about some of the design challenges we face in that. So once again, the whole point of this presentation is to kind of look at some of these topics from both sides and from the science side. So I think it was Susan Bell in Ada County that introduced me to this concept. So we have a lawn, and we're big proponents of xeriscaping, which is choosing plants that are drought tolerant and don't use the water. And she always likes to explain that this is not zero-scaping. So there's several houses in Nyssa that do have this kind of landscaping. And this is just a sign that I've completely given up. I don't really want a lawn, and I don't really want anything else to take care of either. So for some reason, it always has to be the red cinder rocks. And online, I couldn't find the skull or the wagon wheel that went with the rocks. So I guess no one has ever taken a picture of that and posted it online. But I could go now to Nyssa and find 2 or 3 yards to use it as an example. But so the completely gravelly in the front yard.
Yeah, if you want a picture, I can run out and take a picture of the neighbor across the street.
So
they actually have toilets for planters too. So.
Well, bless their hearts.
Yes.
So I think some people think, okay, I'm going to conserve water and I'm going to take care of the weeds and, you know, just not deal with this lawn thing, and I'm going to go for xeriscaping. So that's a very hot lot to be on. There'd be a lot of water runoff. All that rock is kind of rough on any plants that do want to live there, and I think for most aesthetics, probably not the most attractive thing that we've seen, since we all kind of got a good chuckle. And I don't know why it has to have a wagon wheel or a toilet or a dead skull. And I think Susan mentioned it looks like an animal tried to crawl across the gravel and didn't make it all the way, passed away there, and the skull is still remaining. So that's it. So when we're thinking about water conservation, lawns, just because we harvest them so often and they're a crop that's green and that we're watering for a very long season, take a lot of energy and a lot of water. I think the reason they're chosen the most is because they're a one-step solution. So you can take care of all these different weeds by just planting and maintaining the lawn. And to maintain that lawn, you drive machinery and use weed whackers and other fossil fuels to make it all work out. But it's simplistic. It's one plant that you have to control over the season. Whereas xeriscaping, or actually landscaping your lawn, you're dealing with lots of different plants, and you're having to use something other than Roundup for your weed control, because if you round up around all these cute little plants, they're going to go too. But xeriscaping, I think, is probably not the socially or the environmental best answer. I'm guessing economically that the stones probably aren't very expensive. But if you think of property values, choosing xeriscaping over xeriscaping or your lawn may be a bad economic choice if you're going for curb appeal and selling your home someday. So soil health, there's been a lot of talk about no-till versus tilling your soil. Now we've learned a little bit about soil properties and soil health, enough that we can kind of think about things. So on one hand, no-till preserves organic matter, builds organic matter, allows the structure of the soil to stay in place. But if you have compaction and a lot of annual weeds, then tilling might be your best bet to fluff up your soil and to take care of some of those annual weed issues. One thing about having a healthy soil, and this has kind of been the new keyword, is soil health, that only living things can have health. So a lot of people think of soil as basically the mineral content of the soil, but there is a lot of things going on between those soil mineral particles. So there's root hairs and bacterial colonies and mycorrhizae and decomposing plant cells and little amoebas and flagellates and nematodes going around. There's good and bad nematodes. So there's a lot of biology that goes on in our soil as well. And so organic matter matters. It's a huge component of keeping all these little organisms alive. And our plant roots actually don't take up hardly any nutrients on their own. Almost all of that nutrient uptake is in relationship with a bacteria or a fungus or a small amoeba that's helping break down that organic matter into the little tiny components that the plants can actually suck up through their roots. So much like our stomach and intestines, we're not doing all the works from ourselves. There's a whole microcosm that helps us do that. Soil has the same thing. So if you're tilling your soil and using a lot of non-organic fertilizer, a lot of chemical fertilizers, and not taking care of that soil health, then we can't expect it to perform as well as it would otherwise. So some tips for no-till: mulch, and we actually have a whole nother thing on mulch for this. It helps with your weed control. Depending on the mulch you use, it can add to the organic matter in your soil, and it helps with soil tilth, which is basically the fluffiness of your soil. It keeps it from being compacted. Borders. If you don't walk in your garden or your flower beds and you create paths through your lawn, then you're getting rid of the main reason you have compaction issues. And I have raised beds in my backyard, and they kind of stay in the same place. But it's amazing, if you're not standing on the soil that you're trying to grow in, how much easier it is to keep it fluffy. And then you really have to have good weed control if you're going to try to go for a no-till operation. As said, a lot of the tillage is just to get rid of those annual weeds. And so if you let the prickly lettuce and the kochia and the redwood pigweed and the lamb's quarter all go crazy, it's going to be hard to have a no-till garden. And one thing to think about, almost all of our lawns are in a no-till situation. You plant a lawn and it's there for a very long time. And not often are you going and tilling. You might core aerate. That'd probably be as close to tillage as we get in our lawns. And then think about how big lawn tractors have gotten and how often we drive those back and forth across that lawn. So compaction can be a huge issue. Okay, the big organic versus not organic. I think this is a huge huge thing that we battle with as gardeners of making this right choice. So a lot of people will say that they don't use pesticides in their garden because they're organic. Well, there actually are quite a few organically certified pesticides. So even some of the nomenclature there is bad. So organic pesticides are just made out of organic materials. It doesn't really mean that they're less effective or can't be dangerous to bees or other organisms. So you really have to know what you're using and why. So if you're looking for something organic, you need to look for the USDA organic symbol. And there's actually a little bit of money that goes into having this labeling on products. So you always have to kind of consumer beware. The cost to label a product as organic can be high. So maybe that money spent is you'd rather invest in something else. So we're going to look at trying to supply nitrogen organically. And we talked a little bit about the nitrogen cycle last time when we talked about nutrients in the soils, but it's just a very complex cycle, and we can lose nitrogen to the air in a lot of different ways. We look at our nitrogen need for a lawn. So there's a Southern Idaho Fertilizer Guide, and that's a current information system that you can look up, and probably at your next meeting I'll try to print you out one of these. And we can see that organic matter is on that left-hand side. If you have high organic matter, then that organic matter are supplying a lot of nitrogen to your soil, so your application rate of nitrogen is fairly low. But our soils naturally don't have a lot of organic matter in them, and in a lawn situation, you kind of burn through your organic matter. You don't have a good way to reapply it to the lawn. Especially if you're mulching, you're not mulching your lawn, you're taking the clippings off over and over again. That'll eventually lower your soil organic matter as well. So let's say we've got average, or that soil organic matter in the 2 to 3 range, average. So we need to apply 3 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square foot on that lawn. So let's see what it would take to do that naturally. So this comes from your little Idaho vegetable garden book. It actually shows you fertilized material required to supply 1 pound of plant nutrient per 1,000 square feet. So if you remember, we need to apply 3 pounds per 1,000 square feet. So if we look at our complete fertilizers, our commercial fertilizers, there's some that could easily do that. You know, that 24-12-12 or 22-4-4 is going to be just a little over 4 pounds. That 32-4-8 is going to be, takes 1 pound for 3 pounds of nitrogen. So that's not going to be too much to apply. 1 pound of commercial fertilizer per 1,000 square feet probably seems about normal. But if we go and try to do that organically, if we look at that bottom, to supply 1 pound of nitrogen through compost, we need to put 67 pounds of compost on. So if you can think about what's 67 pounds, and then we're going to need to multiply that by 3 because we need to apply 3 pounds of nitrogen. So then we're up to, 200 pounds per 1,000 square feet. That's a lot of compost to try to put on your yard. And when you core aerate, you can sweep a little bit of that in, but that's going to be a pretty thick. You're basically mulching your yard with compost to meet that nitrogen level. Something like fish meal is a little higher concentrate of nitrogen, but also that's going to be pretty difficult to apply to an established lawn. So this is kind of the thing, to have this lawn and to supply the nitrogen it needs, it's going to be really hard to do that organically just because of the no-till method, perennial crop, removal of clippings that we do to keep up with that nitrogen level. So then you have to think, am I so opposed to using non-organic things? Am I not going to have a lawn? Am I going to change that method? Or for this one crop, I'm going to go ahead and use some commercial fertilizer. And we even had a discussion, Ann and Jeff and I did, about how well we want our lawn to look. Does our lawn have to be dark, beautiful, green, thick, homeowners association ready? Or if we live out in the country and and we're basically just have it out there as a weed control method, and maybe the grandkids run through the sprinkler every now and then. Maybe we don't need to supply all the nitrogen it needs. Maybe just enough to keep it greened up and growing healthy enough to keep the weeds out. So those are some management decisions you can make along the way. So how about a vegetable garden? We might be able to supply nitrogen in a vegetable garden organically a little bit easier, because usually our gardens are not no-till. Usually we are turning stuff into the soil continuously. So if we look at the Planting Idaho Vegetable Garden, it's recommending for a vegetable garden 270 pounds of compost per 100 square foot, or 1 pound of ammonium sulfate per 100 square foot. So compost is probably your better answer, and this is food that you're eating, so a good place to place your dollars if you're going to grow organically. But maybe you've had back surgery or knee surgery, and hauling 270 pounds of compost is just not in the books for this year. Maybe buying that small little 1 pound bag of ammonium sulfate is the difference between you being able to grow a vegetable garden and not grow a vegetable garden. So, as people make these decisions, and as master gardeners give advice, I think we have to kind of look at the whole problem there. And, here's the ideal way that we'd like to do things in this perfect world situation. And then here's probably, something that's going to be a little more feasible for people, depending on their situation. So, but I'd say if you're going to pay for organic and really hold to organic standards, using that on the food you eat is probably time well spent. And then down to the thing, can plants actually tell the difference? And they've done quite a bit of research on this, and actually they can't. And the nutrient values in the vegetables, so not talking about pesticide residues or anything, but the actual how much nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium end up in the vegetable, the plant doesn't seem to care between organic and non-organic. So it's just looking at those little building blocks. Another thing is sometimes it's hard to get organic nitrogen there when the plants need it. So the organic nitrogen, coming from compost, you have to wait till the compost breaks down to a certain point before all those nutrients are released. And maybe early in the season, it's just a little too cold and too wet for those bacteria to really be working very hard. And maybe your plants will suffer a little bit because they can't get to that nutrient right when they need it. Where the synthetic fertilizers are pretty fast acting. But then on the other hand, they can be fast acting. They can leach down through your soil things. So maybe they're not there later in the season. And the organic stuff is and gives that slow feed. So once again, two sides to every story. But the plants really don't know the difference of what nutrition you're providing them. I kind of like to compare it to us taking multivitamins versus getting the food or getting the nutrients from food. So sometimes you have to eat an odd combination of food to be able to fill all those micronutrient needs that you have. But we're definitely getting health benefits with the fiber and other things out of our food that we don't get out of the vitamins. So is it, you kind of want to balance that the best that you can. Okay, so out of organic, let's talk about seed choices. And we spent some time talking about this in class. So we all have a little bit better idea of what these definitions mean. So we have heirloom, which is basically an age. Generally, they're greater than 30 years old, and they're open pollinated, which means that if you grow them again, you're going to get the same plant that you get the first time, unless a bee gets in there or the wind blows just right and does the work for you. They are open to cross with other plants. A hybrid is a purposely two plants crossed with each other in a perfectly normal back to Mendel's peas crossing that humans have done for years and years. That's why we have every size and shape of dog known to man, is because we really like to cross things and see what comes out. F1 hybrid is going to be that first year of crossing. Then F2 hybrid is if you take both of those crosses and breed them together, then you really get a variance. So you get a little bit of variance in F1, but all of your dominant traits tend to come through in F1, and then you'll start to see all the recessive traits come back in F2. So that's why growing a hybrid seed the next year is so unpredictable, is you get all those recessive traits that you didn't know were there. And as we talked about in class, genetically modified, that you cannot buy homeowner vegetable garden seed that is genetically modified. So they tried it back then. They had a tomato that they called Flavor Saver, and it actually got withdrawn from the market in 1997 because there was no flavor to save. It was a tomato that basically never rotted, and but didn't have a very good flavor profile. So it went out of market pretty quick. So here's kind of what I was talking about, the genetics versus genetically modified. And I think I admitted in class, we actually grow genetically modified corn, so Roundup Ready corn on our farm. My husband's a dairyman, and he's not a farmer. And for us to get a good crop of corn off, if he doesn't use the Roundup Ready corn, we have a weedy mess and get half the yield and end up out there spraying 2 or 3 times with other products that don't work as effectively. Where if we use Roundup Ready corn, we're out there 1 time with Roundup, and then the field's clean and we're able to move on. So just a kind of a choice we had to base on our management decisions. So normal genetics, we look at the Mendelian genetics. This is Gregory Mendel, a monk that discovered that he could cross plants. So if he crossed a purple plant and a purple plant, 1/4 of the time he got a white plant. And so that's where he kind of started in figuring out these recessive genes and how when you cross 2 things that might be purple, how you sometimes end up with a white one in the mix. And genetics, I think, is fascinating because this is one thing, color, but then he looked at seed, and he looked at height of plant, and he looked at, so when he's all said and done, there's 400 different types of peas you can have when you cross all these different things. And any of us that have kids, that sometimes you get a couple that look alike and some that don't look like anyone and are way different, but you get all these genetics combined in different ways, different things come out. Where genetic modification, this is modern technology. They actually take a bacteria cell and they find a resistant gene. So in this case, they found a resistant gene in an insect, and the bacteria was able to assimilate the DNA from that insect. And then we grow the bacteria and we cut the gene out. And then we actually use a virus to put, or a vector, to put that gene into a plant cell. And so then when that plant cell grows up, it's got a little chunk of that DNA that is insect resistant. So this would be the process for BT corn. So Bacillus thuringiensis is an organic powdered biological, so it actually affects caterpillars. Well, they learn to breed that gene into the corn through genetically modified. So if the worm eats the corn, it automatically dies instead of having to put the BT on the corn. So it actually wasn't even really a change of product they were using. It's just now the plant has it. It's in its genetic makeup instead of an exterior application. But so that just gives you a little bit more information about what's normal genetics and what genetically modified means. So what do you choose? Do you choose a hybrid? Do you choose an heirloom? As I said, we don't have the choice of doing GMO in our gardens. But modern hybrids will offer some disease resistance, usually get a little bit increased production. They produce a little heavier. They might store and transport easier. A lot of modern genetics were to deal with our food system so that we're shipping stuff a long ways. And modern hybrids, you might have some unique flavors. So those little orange ones, the sugar sweet ones, that is a modern hybrid, and they quite haven't matched it in the heirlooms yet. So those doubly sweet things, you have to kind of stick to the modern hybrids. But if you choose an heirloom, then you get to try some unique colors and flavors, all the purples and oranges and greens, and we're preserving a little bit of biological diversity so that we're not narrowed down to just 10 different varieties that are grown over and over again. We've got all these different ones to try. You're able to save seeds. So if you save seeds from those tomatoes, tomatoes are generally self-pollinated, so they will come true the next year. And then by saving seeds and growing these heirlooms, you might have stuff that's more locally adapted, that takes a little bit less water and produces a little better for your growing environment. So once again, that sustainability, what's the better choice, you know, and it's not such a clear-cut answer. So you have people that are working on some of the genetics. And so one of my favorite places is Wild Boar Farms. He's based out of California. Grows all these cool, crazily striped tomatoes and is a small farmer. There's Artisan Seeds. They sell through Johnny's catalog, and they came out with like 6 new created heirlooms is kind of the term that they've coined for these. So it's taking old tomato genetics and combining them in new ways. So Green Zebra was produced by Tom Wagner, and he's also got this one that's purple on the outside. It's an offshoot from an Oregon State tomato that was a purple or blue tomato. And all the blue tomatoes taste kind of funny to me. I haven't found one that I like yet. But so just a lot of new options. So this way you don't have to really choose between modern and old genetics. We get a little bit of both when we go with some of these newer created heirlooms. So this is a topic that has gotten me for years and years, is what to mulch with. And I have to say, I think I've tried just about everything. So we've got your standard like soil prep chip mulch that you can buy from the landscape place. There's plastic mulch. There's fresh mulch. So a lot of people will chase down tree trimmers and say, hey, come dump your tree trimmings at my house. There's this horrible thing called rubber mulch, which is getting to be very, very popular. The school, my kids' school just switched over to rubber mulch, and my kids have come home missing quite a bit of skin because so it's cushiony, but if you run your leg across it tends to rip off flesh, so that's not maybe the best choice for playgrounds. There's rock mulch. There's hay mulch or grass clipping mulch, and straw. And, you know, all these, some of them have some really good points. Most of them are going to conserve some moisture, except maybe your rock or your rubber mulch. Many of them are going to control weeds for you. I have to say the worst mistake I ever made is we had a lot of leftover straw. And I thought, oh, well, I'll mulch my perennial beds with straw. You know, I haven't tried that. And I'm too cheap to go buy the bags of mulch this year. I have never sprouted so many weeds in my life. It was like the perfect storm. It was just enough moisture, but not enough protection because I didn't have it quite deep enough. So I think I'm still recovering from my year of trying to use straw mulch. Plus, any type of wind kind of picked it up and blew it away on me. So far, I kind of like the small chip bark for my perennial beds. If I do squash or pumpkins, I kind of like that black plastic mulch. It warms them up and gets them going a little bit earlier. Not a huge fan of the rock mulch. It compacts the soil a little bit and can be really hot, but sometimes our xeric plants, they actually prefer that rock mulch. They'll rot away if they get those chips up next to their root system. So there's all these different products. One thing hard is we definitely do not live in a forest, so these forest-based mulches probably are not the most sustainable because we're having to haul them for miles and miles to be able to get them. But if you're using just black plastic mulch for one season, then you've got this huge amount of plastic that you're throwing away. So I guess on a dairy farm, our old hay or old straw is probably a fairly local and sustainable mulch, but unfortunately, it sprouts weeds like crazy, so I'm still looking for that perfect choice. So I've made this list of what it would be required for perfect mulch. And so it has to be affordable because I'm kind of cheap. Permanent, so I only have to do it once. That'd be nice. Biodegradable, prevent all weeds forever. Healthy for all the different plants that I grow. Not blow in the wind or travel in water. Can't float away. Can't cause stem or trunk rot. Can't steal nitrogen, so some of those fresh mulches will bind up the nitrogen in your soil for a little bit. Can't have pest or disease in it, not cause compaction, and not radiate too much heat. So, you know, when you get down to what's required for the perfect mulch, it's probably clear why I have not found the perfect solution. It just takes a lot to have one. So we all know it has all these benefits, and finding the right solution for that is a little bit challenging. So here's all my whining about why each of them doesn't work. So bark for me is pretty expensive to get. I think it's a little cheaper as you're closer into Boise. You don't have to haul it quite so far. It will float away, the big bark chunks will sometimes. If you don't get it thick enough, the weeds grow in between. And it doesn't degrade very quickly. So if I have to go in there and dig in my perennial bed and I get one of those big chunks of bark in the hole, then you're trying to dig around and now you've got soil on top of your mulch, and yeah, it's just a challenge. So you can see I've kind of got whining about each of these. So I think we see over and over again, you definitely got to mulch your garden. That's a huge thing to do. And then there's all these challenges is with the mulches that we find. Okay, so the last one for today is talk about the community garden. And I know Diane used to be involved in a pretty big community garden, and I've helped with a few of my own. So I think on the left-hand side, you have what the public thinks. You have this beautiful urban space, and it's all perfectly maintained, and everyone enjoys the vegetables that come from it. And the reality is people are very excited to plant things in the spring, and nobody wants to weed in July and August. So to keep the beds maintained, you have to have a very dedicated bunch of people. I've actually solved some of the issues in my local community garden as we partnered with the juvenile justice system that they need community service hours, and they really like the garden because they can come at any time in July and August on the kids' schedule, and they can help with a community-based project. And so that's been working pretty well. But then I realized that, we grew the first couple of years some odd vegetables. We tried kohlrabi and we had yellow cucumbers, and not anything too weird, but some different things. And our audience that we were trying to feed out of that community garden basically would only use tomatoes and bell peppers and maybe some normal cucumbers, that they weren't huge vegetable eaters to begin with, and our odd vegetables were really throwing them for a loop of what they should do with them. So looking at a sustainable approach, everyone, I think, loves the idea of the community garden, but trying to find something that matches the reality and that's sustainable year after year, that people want to participate, and that you're feeding the audiences that you want to feed. So I found these comics that I thought were kind of funny for based on sustainability. So we have flaunt your sustainability on the right-hand side here. Everyone will be jealous of your wind turbine. Display the superior maneuverability of your smart car. Adopt the feral neighborhood wildlife. Who says that recycling can't be competitive? And instill the insane environmental consciousness in your kids. And I love how she's sitting drinking a lemonade as her kid hauls mulch around. So, and on the bottom, they have the 100% truly sustainable organic market. And the one guy said, nothing is 100% sustainable. And the guy says, we'll see. And so, the earth has been destroyed and he has been completely sustainable. His store is still there. So I think we have to look at the fallacies of trying to be 100% sustainable. So everything has its life cycle, and unless your garden plans to float out there away from the earth, still being sustained, everything is a compromise. Well, thank you guys for listening. As I said, I might try to go back to the beginning for those that were trying to watch this from recording and I missed the first couple slides. Once again, if you're in my Jim County class, the next time we meet in person will be March 9th. So 12 to 6, just like last time, same place. And we'll be covering soils and growing fruits and berries and a little bit of season extension. It's kind of what I have on the tap for that one. We'll be giving you bags to collect your soil samples so we can get your free soil sample for being part of Master Gardeners. Anything over that first one, I think I got the price is going to be $15 for anything over that first sample. And then our very last class will be March 23rd. And for my New Meadows students, it will be March 24th. And I think I missed a webinar in there, so I think we might have one more after that class. But that's kind of what our schedule's looking like. It's about a month more of meeting like this and doing our in-person classes. So looking forward to that. Okay, well, I am going to take a few minutes here and then go to the front of the screen and keep talking. So unless you want to rehear the first part again, have a good evening, and hopefully you've got something good planned for dinner, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Tessa.
You're welcome. See ya.
Okay, I'll remind you next time.
Thanks, Jan.
I love you.
Bye, Montessa. Thanks.
Bye. Okay, I think I have to unscreen share to get back to the top here. So.
Tessa, can we get a copy of your PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, I will send that out, and I should be able to get the video for this out right away too. So I was going to send that ahead of time, and that didn't happen today. So yes, definitely.
That's okay, that was very good. I want to keep those.
Okay, good.
Thanks, hon.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Okay, for those of you that have held on so that you could see the beginning of the slideshow, I think I just about got a reset here. Okay, so today's topic was sustainable landscapes. I think I hit record about 4 or 5 slides in, so I'm just going to reintroduce the topic, and you can hear what happened in the beginning. So sustainable, so definition of sustainable, so capable of being sustained, so it can last for a long time. Of, relating to, or being a method of harvesting or using a resource so that the resource is not depleted or permanently damaged. So I think this is a lot of us what we're using as our definition of sustainable. So sustainable techniques, sustainable agriculture, and of or relating to a lifestyle involving the use of sustainable methods. So I think all of us would like our gardens to be sustained into the future, that we would like to use sustainable methods, and that this is kind of a lifestyle for us, that we're choosing to do things sustainably. So we had the conversation, is this landscape sustainable? And what factors would you use to make this decision? As I said, throughout this presentation, I've tried to kind of play both sides. So on one hand, I see a landscape that looks fit for an English garden. Then if this is in southern Idaho, that this might be a kind of a mismatch between climate and plant choice. There's a lot of boxwoods in there. There's a lot of conifer trees that are right up next to the building. All these shrubs are placed really close together, so sustainable. I don't know in the future if this is going to be able to support this much plant material. The Japanese maples in front of all that brick, they might not like to have quite that much heat exposure. And this might be a very expensive garden to put in. We're talking about economic sustainability. On the other hand, this place has very good hardscape that's probably going to last a long time. They have split between lawn and other plantings, so sustainable that way in water and maintenance. It's not all lawn. And this might be a very pleasing garden. People might get a lot of use out of this. They might use that front yard more than the standard person was, just because it's kind of blocked off from the street. So that might make it sustainable. So when we're looking at this word sustainable, we kind of have to think all the way around a question. So the factors that you should look at in sustainability are environmental, economic, and social. So as we were talking about that house, I think I focused mostly on the environmental. Economically, that's probably a pretty expensive landscape to put in with that many plantings in it. But maybe it adds huge curb appeal, and they can get a higher price for that landscape in front of their home. Socially, Maybe that house is in an HOA or in a community where that's the expectation of what your front yard's going to look like. And that having, tomato cages and vegetables in the front yard would not be socially acceptable, and it'd be hard to live in that neighborhood. So when we're looking at sustainability, we kind of have to look at all of these different pieces. So we talked about what is the more sustainable planting here. So we have an annual border versus a xeric lawn replacement. And probably your first inclination is to look at that xeric lawn replacement and think, well, that's a lot more sustainable. We're using plants that don't use a lot of water, and they're well established. It's not costing, they're perennials. It's not costing to put in this garden every year. But you can kind of play devil's advocate on the other hand. If that annual border is all done from seeds, and the reason they put in annual flowers there is they had a huge issue with puncture vine, that this annual border was a very good way to control it, where that xeric lawn replacement might not have controlled the puncture vine as well. And maybe they get a lot of enjoyment out of that annual border. Maybe they do cut flowers out of that, and that saves them economically from having to buy flowers at the store. So sometimes you can't see sustainability just on the surface. And I believe this is the slide that I finally hit record on. I can't remember how far into the conversation I had gotten before I caught that mistake. But we have two different fertilizers here. I have to laugh. The one actually says Master Gardener's Secret on that. And if it is a secret, I've not been made aware of that secret. But it's bat guano fertilizer. It's 2 pounds of fertilizer. And it says it's a fast release 020 fertilizer. And the one on the right is a Vigoro commercial fertilizer. There's 5 pounds there of a 12-5-7. And so the left-hand side says fast release, and this one actually says contains time-release nitrogen for extended feeding. So looking at what's most sustainable, some would say, oh, you definitely want the 100% organic product, that's going to be a more sustainable choice environmentally. Or you could look economically, that the one on the left is $10 for 2 pounds, and the one on the right is $8.48 for 5 pounds. And you're only getting phosphorus fertilizer out of the one on the left, and you're getting nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium out of the one on the right. So sometimes packaging can be a little bit confusing. Then you have to think of, carbon footprint and how much fossil fuels we're using. We probably don't have a local source of bat guano. So that fertilizer may have needed to travel farther than the commercial fertilizer, which may have been produced more locally. So those are just some of the questions that, as we step through this PowerPoint that we've worked on. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here so that I can share this video. And thanks and apologies for not hitting record in the beginning, but hopefully we got you caught up. Okay, thanks.